Okay, look, this it sucks because I just got done uploading this video. I got done recording it just a few minutes ago, and then later I finally finished uploading it. It finally finished uploading to my channel, and then I published it. And I thought I was fine. I was done. But one of you guys let me know there was no sound, and I checked it, and yeah, there was no sound, and I realized that I accidentally muted my mic. So hopefully this time it'll go better. Well, here's hoping. So, welcome to my channel. And in this video, we're going to be talking about the reviews for The Last of Us Part 2. And these reviews are interesting because for some of them, it's not what I expected, but for a lot of them, it is what I expected. IGN, GameSpot, all of these other shill websites gave it exactly what we all expected it to have. A 10 out of 10. Perfect, nothing wrong with it. Absolutely beautiful, masterful game. Every other company, stop what you're doing. Don't bother making any more games. They have discovered the perfect game, and it is The Last of Us Part 2. Do not bother doing any more work. Don't bother making any more games because you will not beat this game. This game is perfect. There is absolutely nothing wrong with this game. But then you get to some of these other websites. Now, these websites, I also expected them to shill for this game, and yet they didn't. But before we get to those sites, I just wanted to let you guys know about this. Now, IGN, if you go over to their website, you'll see that they're giving The Last of Us Part 2 a glowing review. However, if you go to IGN in Japan, they do not give this game a glowing review. Now, obviously, they talk about the gameplay and the graphics, and obviously all of that is good. None of us thought it was going to be bad. And if that's all you're looking for this game, then I think you're going to find it. But for everyone else, well, it's interesting because they talk about the story. Now, this is IGN Japan, and it is using Google Translate, so I do apologize if the translation isn't perfect. But basically, when you get to the story, they talk about things like the problems with new characters. They talk about structural defects in storytelling. And it's very interesting. I highly recommend you go read it yourselves, because I think you're going to find it very, very interesting. But let's get to these other sites that I want to talk about. Let's start with a site like Polygon, a site that is run by shills, and yet they themselves said they are not giving this game a glowing review. Because look at the title alone, The Last of Us Part 2 review. We, sir, are better than this. We are better than this. The Last of Us Part 2 depicts the future, yet it fails to escape its own past. And again, I won't get into the article because it's a pretty long article. And unfortunately, if I read this, if I read through all of this video would be too long. And also, it's got some things that are kind of cringe. But again, you can read it for yourself if you wanted to. But let's go over to Vice. Now, they said some things in this article. I do have another site that I want to check out, but let's focus on Vice for a minute. Let's read this. Now, this mainly focuses on the story, which is the one that all of us were mostly interested in when it came to considering what we know about the game beforehand. Let's read through this. Okay. The Last of Us 2 to carry the experience it doesn't have. It doesn't take long to make crystal clear that our heroes' revenge stories are making them the villains in the other people's narratives. Even before it begins trying to humanize the people you are busy killing, The Last of Us 2 is a game of squalid cruelty. It's not just the fact that you torture and kill people even as they plead with you to spare them, or the incredibly detailed destruction of faces and bodies that happens with shocking regularity throughout this game. It is also the growing lack of justification. Nobody ever reconsiders their quest for vengeance. Everyone acts under a kind of vindictive compulsion that goes little remarked and unexamined. Now, when it comes to the story and it being a revenge story, I do have something else for you guys, so keep that in mind. Anger and grief are understandable motivations at the start of a revenge quest, but The Last of Us 2 never follows through on the work of exploring what sustains them past reason and scruple. That's why it falls short of its ambitions of being a work of tragedy. Despite roundly excellent performances by the cast, the characters' motivations are enough to understand, but they're also increasingly less compelling as this game drags on. the and the losses mount. It's little wonder that some of the game's best moments come during a major subplot that gives us respite from the vendettas and characters that drive most of the game's action. The things that serve as the catalyst for a story aren't always interesting reasons for its continuation. But that doesn't stop The Last of Us 2 from revisiting the same traumas every time it needs to justify the next bloodbath, and hoping that the screams and gurgles of the dying will give it meaning. The Last of Us Part 2 feels complacent yet also preoccupied with its predecessor. Every facet of the original game has been expanded and enlarged in the sequel, but not actually improved. It's as if its only inspiration is the original game and the well of pop culture it was drawing from. There is particularly nothing here we haven't seen and done repeatedly throughout previous Naughty Dog games. It sets out to surpass its predecessor, but the only meaningful contrast between them is in its even more oppressive bleakness and violence. It digs two graves, fills them with blood, and then just fucking wallows in them. That is pretty scathing when it comes from Vice, and again, considering the game is chock full of identity politics, you would think sites like this would give it a glowing review just because of that. But again, a little surprising that they are pretty much lambasting the story, pretty much calling it just a pitiful revenge story where it's just nothing. And again, we move on to a site like Kotaku. Listen to what Kotaku says, or at least the person who reviewed this. The Last of Us didn't give me any moments like, I'm guessing that, okay, in the above quoted video, Druckmann says the core game is about these real, intimate, intense relationships. I bring this up not to quote the game's marketing, but to try to understand what the people who made it thought they were doing. The story I experienced was about relationships only insofar as characters did things to each other. I didn't learn anything about what it means to be human, or what we're capable of when we're hurt, or what can happen when we want to hurt others. The way Joel hurt Ellie in The Last of Us felt relatable to me. Even if the fate of humanity has never hung in the balance, I know how it feels to make a desperate, selfish choice to hang on to something you love. The Last of Us 2's amount of cruelty and violence ultimately overwhelmed any chance of that relatability here. I didn't find it prurient. The game doesn't relish in its its gory deaths or its emotional suffering. It just takes every opportunity to show them over and over, and decides that it counts as saying something about them. It showed me so much ugliness and in such detail that I felt numb, as terrible as things befell more characters I cared about. Sometimes I did these terrible things myself through gameplay. Sometimes I just watched things play out in front of me with no say in the matter. A lack of agency that was so skillfully used in the first game. Neither circumstance felt more affecting than the other. Both just felt like more. The game's diversity, which I appreciated at the beginning, just felt like an equal opportunity for different kinds of people to suffer as the game went on. Eventually, my numbness turned to an anger I've never felt about a video game. Late one night, I paused the game and asked myself aloud if the developers thought I was stupid. If they thought the existence of violence had just never occurred to me before. It's difficult to talk about all of this a week before most of you reading can play the game for yourself. In a recent fawning piece in British GQ, Cuckman is quoted as saying, "There were people at Naughty Dog, a minority of them, that were just stuck on how violent the game is and how dark and cynical it is about mankind. That even the people who made the game are divided about it is a clear sign that players are going to have radically different experiences. The first game's story was polarizing. This one will clearly be as well. So many people worked on this game for so long and at such cost that I want The Last of Us 2 to be more than the experience I had. It's a visually beautiful game that feels distinct to play, and the story it tells and how it tells it, at the most basic level, certainly pushes the edges of what games have done before. None of those accomplishments elevated or redeemed it for me, like the nature consuming Seattle or the outbreak consuming humanity. Its ugliness overshadowed everything else." So again, not a glowing review of the game, at the very least when it comes to the story, which is what a lot of people were looking forward to when it comes to this game. You can talk about the gameplay and the visuals as much as you want, but people loved The Last of Us because, or at least the majority of people who loved The Last of Us loved it because of the story. And yet you have sites like Kotaku, Polygon, Vice, sites that tend to shill to the highest order, and yet they themselves are telling you that the story is basically nothing. It's basically just violence for the sake of violence. Now, I remember when I said about the revenge story, I do just want to point you guys to this. This is a video from SkillUp, a video from a YouTube channel called SkillUp, and I highly recommend you head on over to his channel. It's a pretty good channel. He just posted a review of The Last of Us Part 2. Now, he does go pretty in-depth without spoiling the story, but he does go in-depth when it comes to the gameplay and the visuals. But specifically, there is a part that I want to show you when it comes to the game story, which should tell you pretty much everything you need to know. So let me just put my headphones on here real quick. And I hope, let's just listen to this. Please pay close attention.
Barring a few flashback sequences, the game just never comes up for air. A central theme of this game is deconstruction. The game actively tries to deconstruct your memory of the characters from the first game in a way that some will find challenging and interesting, but I find inelegant and unnecessary. The best parallel I can draw to this game is the new Star Wars trilogy, which was intent on challenging and deconstructing your memory of characters and events from the original trilogy. If you appreciated the choices that the new trilogy made, there's a chance you'll also enjoy The Last of Us 2. If you feel as though the new trilogy needlessly tinkered and reframed things without creating new things to celebrate and love, then I think you might arrive at the same place with this game. Without spoiling any of the details, much of the game hinges upon the decisions that Ellie makes. I found many of these decisions to be so unbelievable and so ludicrous that I was laughing out loud as I watched things unfold. Ellie's decisions feel like they're made in a vacuum, separate from her history, her values, her morals, or even common sense. There just isn't enough groundwork laid to justify what she's doing. It very much reminded me of Game of Thrones Season 8, which is not a flattering comparison. The story also has...
Okay, that's pretty much it. I won't play any other part. Again, I highly recommend you head on over to his channel and watch the video in its entirety, but don't worry, I will leave a link to the video in the description box down below so you guys can go check it out for yourselves. But basically, yes, again, when your sequel is being compared to the sequel trilogy, the Disney trilogy and Game of Thrones Season 8, that is not a good comparison. The majority of audiences hated those two things because of exactly what he mentions in the video, because of the whole deconstruction thing. And it's just, it sucks. And again, considering what we know, again, which I won't spoil, and considering how the guy in the video compared it to something like the sequel trilogy and what it did with those characters, I think that tells you everything. And again, if you know about the leaks, which again, I'm not saying what they are, but if you know them and if you've seen the footage, then you should know what he's talking about. And worst for me is when he compared it to Game of Thrones Season 8. And again, like he said, when you had characters making decisions that just didn't feel right, that didn't feel like it's within their character, and how you're just sitting there wondering how the hell they're being this stupid. It's just, again, yeah, it does remind us of Game of Thrones Season 8. Again, another season, again, another thing that the majority of people just did not like, specifically for that reason. And it's just, it sucks. It absolutely sucks. So, there it is. That's all I have to say on this. And again, I'm sorry, I said more in the other video, but I hate repeating myself. That is all I have to say for this. Guys, as always, leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Consider leaving a like. Consider sharing this video. And while you're here, maybe consider clicking on the subscribe button. And if you do click on the subscribe button, please remember to click on the bell icon. That way you will know whenever a new video goes up and whenever we're about to go on a live stream. And with all of that out of the way, and also if you watch the video all the way to the end, thank you so much. I highly appreciate the support. Maybe consider doing so for my future videos, or you can go check out some of the other videos that I have on my channel. And with all of that said and out of the way, thank you guys so much for joining me. Please remember to stay safe and take care of yourselves. That is the most important thing in the world right now. And please consider joining me for my next video. You guys have been awesome. Take care. Bye.